Welcome to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today, and I am stoked. Now, make sure that you are doing the things while I am stoked. You got to hit the buttons, like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails when we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. And also, make sure you're signing up for the new Reinforcement Loop newsletter, which comes out every Monday and gets you back into the loop so you guys can stay in that loop. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, hit them up in the comment section. We can engage those throughout the show. And other than that, let's dive in. Clay, you're up first. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
Okay, yeah. So Clay Surratt, I'm a Army veteran, father, husband, son. You asked me once before, like, what I consider myself. I think you even called me a philosopher, which I actually really appreciate, but I do not think I fall into that category because there are people out there who are way smarter than I am. I think I'd actually thought about it now for a while. I think I would consider myself more of an educator taking general knowledge and information and just sharing it is my passion. So that would consist of being an educator in counseling, leadership, jiu-jitsu, combat sports, all the combat sports. So yeah, Army veteran and educator.
Bam, I love it. I use the term facilitator. I think we're in the same boat, but I really like that term myself. Isaac?
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, my name is Isaac Miller. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, husband, father, own Prolific Health and Fitness and Prolific Therapy Clinic, where we, just serve people through health and fitness and a holistic approach to health and fitness. And I now just kind of do my best to help mentor other young entrepreneurs, especially like those transitioning from first responders or veterans into finding their next mission. And oftentimes in the world of entrepreneurship. So excited to be on.
I love it. And I specifically, once I knew Clay was on, Isaac, we've had this set up for a little while, and then Clay was on. I was like, oh, these two guys are going to be like perfect for each other. John, how's the mountains treating you?
Yeah, things are good out here. I was thinking the same thing, just as the boys were giving their openers. And of course, we've had both guests on a number of times on the podcast in the past. And so I know their rhythm. I know how deeply they are as thinkers. I know how broadly they are experienced as men. And so I think it's going to be a really great conversation because the subject of brotherhood, I do believe is commonly considered at a very surface level. It's a loose definition that hardly anyone understands, but it remains so surface that everyone thinks they understand it. But I don't think that's true. I think it's way deeper than most people talk about or think about. So for the next 2 hours, we'll see what we come up with.
I have a feeling we're going to hit on some deeper subjects, just a general, off the top of my head kind of thing. It's kind of what we do here. I have a perfect question right off the bat. I want to hit you guys up. Isaac, I'm going to come to you with this one right off the hop. And it's about not just the brotherhood, but the unspoken world of the brotherhood, the stuff that we never really talk about, and like how shared service creates it, and then we don't ever really have to kind of talk about it ever again. We just accept that it's there. Isaac, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's shared service. I think it's shared trauma. And this is something where shared service, I think that's part of it. But I know a lot of people who have served in some capacity, whether in a lot of that outside of the military, they still do some kind of service, but the brotherhood isn't quite there, that deep feeling of, in the Marine Corps, what we call esprit de corps. And it's trying to unpack why. And oftentimes that brotherhood is truly bonded more and deeper through a shared trauma. And it doesn't even have to be like you and I going through the same trauma together at the same time. It could be just understanding that your trauma and my trauma are somewhat similar in a world where maybe people don't understand our trauma. And so I can meet, Clay for the first time and have a stronger connection to him than someone else, because I understand that deep down, we more intimately understand each other's pain more than a normal quote unquote person does. And I think that kind of is what causes that deep rooted brotherhood to come out. I do think service is a part of it, but I think it's more a shared level of trauma and experience that most people don't have outside of a specific community.
Interesting, Clay. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that a lot. It's really hard to talk about brotherhood without, saying all the cliches and all the typical things that people say. When I listen to him talk about it, it reminds me of, trying to think about what is it about, being in the service or serving with another person that really builds that kind of bond that's it's there, it's intrinsic, it's known. And I guess that I would say that when you struggle through things, be it trauma or a 20-mile ruck march, you get to see the truth behind a person. You get to see them, remove all of the things that people thought about them from their hometown or what they think they were from wherever they came from. And you strip them down to the 25th mile of a 27-mile ruck march. You get to see a person like truly, like that's who that person is. And so to be accepted by people, and some people aren't accepted, let's be honest. Some people come to a unit or come to a place and they don't feel accepted or they don't want to be, and they kind of lose that. But for the most part, most people see someone go through, a struggle, whether, it could be a law enforcement officer in an active live shooting with other law enforcement officers. But in those really serious life-changing moments, you get to see a person for who they truly are. And so you accept one another in that raw sense. And it's an unbreakable bond after that. You truly see a person with all of the personas and masks removed, and you accept them and they accept you. And to me, that kind of facilitates, what we would call a brotherhood in some way.
You get to see people without their stories. I like that. That's really cool. Sean, you got thoughts on this?
I do. And I'm with the boys. I don't think service is enough. I don't think that just, and I use the term just to make a context, I don't think just being in the service creates brotherhood. I think shared adversity creates brotherhood. And what do I mean by shared adversity? I'm going to give an example, a little story. It'll take me a couple of minutes, maybe. I don't know. I haven't really thought it through. But anyway, first time I thought, or I think I understood brotherhood in the military was one of my very earliest courses. I think my second course was a reconnaissance patrolman course, which is a freaking beatdown, man. A beatdown. Back in the day, it was a beatdown, and I'm sure it is today. And so, went through that process, got right to the very last day of the course, and still didn't know if I'd passed or not, because that's the way it was. You walked into the room, and there was the staff. You think you did enough, but you don't know if you did enough. The staff looked me in the eyeball and said, "You passed. Next man." That was it. You passed. And I was out the door. And I was shattered, man, before I walked into that room. And after I walked out of that room, I was still shattered. Like, I was so lack of sleep. I was so hungry. I was so freaking bofangled up in my melon that I could barely string sentences together. I was that tired. And so there wasn't much processing to do other than I passed. So as I walked out the door, it didn't hit me like a hammer. I didn't get this rush of satisfaction. I was just so fatigued that it was just Now, why is that important? Because as I'd walked out, there was another guy walking in, and we shared a glance. And it was he was looking at me for, "Did you make it?" And I was looking at him with a, "I hope you make it." because we'd been side by side, and I thought he'd done the work, and I thought that if I've done the work and I made a pass and he did his work, the equal of mine, he should pass. That's what I thought. These are simple terms, simple moments. And so in that moment that he went in not knowing and I was coming out knowing, it was my first sort of, that's brotherhood. Because I don't think brotherhood is about like we both passed and now we both recognize each other as like being magnificent. I don't think it's about that. Like, I think it's about so much more of sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes you make the cut, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're so deep in it that, you know, you think that that's what it is, but it isn't. It's a lot of things that make up the brotherhood. And I don't think a casual shell, I'll call it a casual container called service, is the brotherhood.
I'm glad you guys hit this right off the bat, because it always reminds me of the dudes that I went overseas with. I always thought that would be like the crew kind of forever. And I don't really talk to any of them anymore. Like, I don't really engage with them anymore because there wasn't so much a sense of sharing in that section initially. And I like the way you put it, Sean, in that we were both putting in the work, trying to do the best for each other. And I felt that the section I was with was very much, and I'm including myself in this one, we were looking out for ourselves more than we were looking out for each other. And it is it's a challenge when you look back at those things too, because you got to take a lot of personal heat on those. Of like, man, did I ever screw that up? Or I was not doing my best in that moment to kind of maintain that brotherhood. That same similar sense of brotherhood I have with some of the people in the collective, right? There's it's interesting how you guys bring this back to, it's almost about more suffering than it is about the service in and of itself. I'm going to come back to Isaac. Any other thoughts? What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, it's the suffering, really. And it's funny because now being in the, what I call the arena or the game of entrepreneurship, and, you know, even people who aren't veterans, I can meet another, you know, business owner who is still in that kind of startup phase, or, you know, they're still in that kind of small to medium sized business. And we can look at each other and, like, if we know each other as a business owner, we both kind of laugh because we know everyone we meet says, oh, must be nice to have your own business and do what you want. And then we both will look at each other and smile and laugh, be like, yeah, it's nice. Knowing that we just went through so much crap and, you know, got kicked in the teeth every day for day after day after day, week after week, year after year to build something. And ultimately to build it to just help and serve others. And it's a shared suffering that every business, Clay is experiencing it now and will experience it as he opens his gym. And Sean's experienced this with all of the endeavors that, you know, he's started up, from coffee to, you know, tech to everything else. Chance, you're experiencing this, building up a YouTube and a channel and a community of veterans and first responders. And so it's something that, you know, even non-military members who've gone through this experience, it's the suffering where, you know, we can look at each other and just kind of smile and laugh as people say, oh, must be nice, and not feel the need to correct them, not feel the need to justify ourselves, because, well, we get it. The brotherhood gets it, you know, and that's something that I think expands past just the extreme, you know, trauma of maybe military life, but something, you know, a little bit more simple and close to home for, you know, other people listening, where it's like just something like owning a business.
That is a fantastic point. Clay, you got thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I always try to you know, imagine as if, you know, I was just, you know, someone that had no idea at all of what we're saying. And, you know, the you know, the obvious thing is, you know, the suffering, but what do you mean by the suffering? And I think it's important to kind of hit on that a little bit, because, you know, a lot of people may not understand what it doesn't necessarily have to be military suffering. It could be the kind, you know, something about a person. We'll just take for an example, like I always use jiu-jitsu as an example because it's such a good one, right? You can use it in every aspect. but it's as though if I see another black belt or a black belt, I'm a brown belt, so not there yet. But if you see a black belt, right, and you see the cauliflower ear, or it's the same kind of thing that you get when a special operator walks into the room and like it. There are implied character traits that come along with that black belt. It's not just adversity or suffering, it's this prolonged aspect of them as a human that's willing to go through these hard things for a long period of time. So immediately I can imply a lot of things about that person's character. And I love that because I can resonate with that, because there's something about my military service very different from Isaac's and Sean's, but there's something about that service, which is like the can to the ingredients, that I can share with them without even telling them. They don't even have to tell me. I know that there are some ingredients in the character of that person that I resonate with, or even in Sean's case, that I look up to because I've experienced a little bit of it or some sense of it. So it draws me in to want to know them better, or there are parts of them that are very much like my own that I can immediately give without, the small talk that you usually have to do when you meet somebody, that you don't really know. So to me, I think understanding that the suffering doesn't have to necessarily be service, like we're saying. It's just knowing that a person has implied character traits that gets them to the black belt, that gets them to the special operator, that gets them to even 20 years in law enforcement or firefighting. It's the same. There's something to the person that immediately you can respect. And to me, that's a big component of the Brotherhood.
I'm really digging this. It reminds me very much of, kind of a farm boy mentality. A lot of people that are on the ranches and stuff like that, similar mindsets, people that work like linemen and people who are working trades every day. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the concept of get work until the work is done. Right. And I think that's part of it, even with the suffering, suffer until the suffering's done. We're all just going to go through it until it's over, rather than I don't like this and I'm going to dip off. So I'm loving where this is going already. Sean, what are you thinking?
I think we're getting right to be where we need to be, and that is that general theme of so how much suffering, So if the shell is service, if the shell is, you step in to serve your fellow man, but it's day one, and you don't have a body of work behind you, and you know that the sort of trajectory to successfully understanding how to serve well requires some suffering. But what does that even mean? Like what kind of suffering? Like, do I get to sleep for the rest of the year? One meal a day? What is it? What is suffering? And so I think it's not just a simple equation of how much do I have to suffer to understand the Brotherhood. I think it's got to be, how do I put myself in adversity where I'm going to suffer, but be surrounded by others that are also doing the same? Because it's not enough to understand how you respond in these moments. It's equally as important that you understand how others respond in these moments. And so it becomes a case of you begin to rely on yourself, and you begin to understand who you can rely on around you. There has to be maybe not a culling process, but there has to be a forging process that sharpens the steel enough to understand that the person to your left and right is dependable. You can rely on them. And that doesn't mean that 100% you can rely on them. You just have a framework of understanding that there's a difference between, I like this person, they're nice, versus they're part of the Brotherhood. Because I know lots of people who are nice, but there's lots of people that I can't count on. And when I say count on, that doesn't mean they're going to carry all the burdens and solve all of the problems. By count on, I mean someone I know is going to be in the game with me, in the game. Doesn't mean they've got to do it better than me or worse than me or the same as me. What it does mean in my brotherhood is I can look at you and I know we're going to go. It's going to happen. We're on the same path. Who's ahead? Who's behind? Whatever, man. We are aligned and we're going to go kick that ass. That is the brotherhood to me.
So I have a thought on that. Isaac, you got something?
Well, I love that Sean brought this up because there was something that was pulling my thoughts towards, when we have this shared adversity and it helps create the brotherhood, but how long, like Sean asked, how much adversity or how much, suffering. And for me, it's thinking it never stops. The adversity never stops, because when it does, I mean, how many movies and shows have we seen where you have these like operators that end up in this horrible situation that was actually brought on by their, generals in command that were pulling these strings and stuff. And it really, that's a metaphor to, what we experience, where at some point command starts playing a game for themselves and not playing a game for their men. And in entrepreneurship, we see this where businesses get so big that they just start wanting profit for the CEO's pockets and for shareholders and not for their people. And I think you get to a point where you don't need to suffer or go through adversity anymore. And as soon as you exit that, you kind of exit the brotherhood. And it's not even that that you mean to, it's just there becomes this disconnect and distance that builds. And those people, even though they might be in the community, aren't in the community. They're not in the brotherhood. They're above it, or at least that's how they feel and how they act. And then it causes all the people in that brotherhood to look at them with disdain, thinking like, you don't understand. You're like, God, he just doesn't get it anymore. Like, how? They used to be in your shoes. They used to be in our shoes, but why are they so, the way they are? Well, it's because they've graduated, quote unquote, from that adversity. And that's why a lot of the leaders that we respect who stay leaders put themselves in adversity. My best, colonel that I served under was a jiu-jitsu guy. Did jiu-jitsu every day. He would come roll with us. I was on the Marine Corps' grappling team, and he would come roll with us all the time. He was a great leader, but he kept himself in adversity. He kept himself in some form of suffering. So I love that Sean brought that up and asked that question, because it begs the question of, what happens when you stop the adversity? Do you leave the brotherhood?
That's a dang good question, Clay. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple ways for me anyway to think about it. Is the people that I admire the most now, post military service, are the people who choose adversity. It's willful adversity. So to me, listening to you guys talk, it's almost as if the adversity, you can pick or choose which kind, is almost like the pruning force to the people that you're going to surround yourself with. And, a lot of times certain kinds of adversity can max out. So if you're the kind of person that's okay there and you just get comfortable and don't willfully choose another sort of discomfort for yourself, then you kind of, you take yourself down a level, because you might be in the brotherhood to that comfort level, but are you going to be in the brotherhood of the people who continually seek out discomfort? So you kind of limit yourself if you're the kind of person that finds their limit of adversity and stays there, as opposed to the people like I admired, like Sean and yourself, Isaac and Chance, who are choosing these, you're doing Muay Thai and it's completely foreign to you and you're choosing that. And those are the kinds of people where I understand you. And I can relate to you as a brother, because I understand the kind of person that will go do some race that they don't know about just for the sheer fact that you want to be uncomfortable and learn something about yourself. And those are the kinds of people I think are in a rare type of brotherhood. They're rare in the fact that they willfully seek adversity.
That's a fantastic point. And I want to play with Sean's metaphor a bit about forging. And I don't think the forging process is interesting in and of itself. So when you started talking, Sean, about needing some sort of selection or some sort of way to strip away things, when you're forging, you actually, what you're trying to do is remove slag. You're trying to get rid of impurities, things that won't fit with the piece of iron. And the other part of it is that it needs to be heated to such a degree that it becomes malleable. And I think that's where the brotherhood lies, is that when you heat metals together, or when you put dudes, especially when you put us together in a really, really difficult situation, we will either come together or we will break apart. You will either be cast aside as slag, or you will be actually bonded to one another. And I really like this analogy, so I'm going to keep playing with it. But I want to get your guys' thoughts on it. Sean, what do you think about that?
Well, I agree. It's kind of why I threw it across. I didn't really dig into it, but I was going to expand on the layering system, or in order to create a proper blade that is flexible, sharp, fast, deadly, lethal, all that good stuff. You need layers. You can't just be a brittle single piece. And so my intent was to play with it, layers within yourself and layers within the team. And so for yourself, the layers that you need in order to kind of understand levels of brotherhood is you can't show up one dimensional. You've got to show up with more skills than just one to be part of the brotherhood, in my opinion. You can't just be freaking strong, but weak in the mind. You can't just be strong in the mind, but weak in the biceps. All of that good stuff. You've got to have physical attributes. You've got to have emotional attributes. You've got to have mental attributes. You need to be a fairly complex human to fit into a fairly complex and robust scenario called a high-performing brotherhood. And so that's what we're talking about, is what level of high performance do you then categorize as the brotherhood? Because I've already established, and I'm happy to debate this with anyone, that simply being a member within a shell called service isn't the brotherhood. So at what point, how many layers do you have to have inside of yourself? And how many layers in a team do you need to create that initial blade that is going to teach you what brotherhood is? And so how many? Because maybe basic training will teach it to you. Maybe if it's the combat arms basic training. Maybe combat arms basic training won't teach it to you. Maybe it's that first course that you take that's really hard. That's the sort of gateway course to the freaky hard stuff. Who knows? Who knows what it is? But at some point, brotherhood occurs. And so how adverse does it have to be? How bad does it have to be? How many times do you have to get that beat down? You know what I'm saying? That's what I'd like to ask. Is if we're using the blade analogy for layers within you and within your surrounding brotherhood, how many layers does it take?
How many roads must a man walk down, really? This is a meaning of life kind of question. I'm going to throw it at Clay first. What do you think?
I think that's a tough one. I think, when I think about myself, I think about some of the stuff that Chance had said too about, I also struggled, and I still do struggle with, my relationships with people that I served with, a long time ago. So it makes you think, if just service was the what binded all of the blade together, it wouldn't be enough. And it's not, because it's for a lot of people, we don't typically keep up with the people that we served with in different areas. I deployed numerous times, so I clearly I don't keep up with all the people that I deployed with each time. So then you have to wonder, well, what is it? What's the level? And other than adding on this additional, we have to continually suffer to be a part of this, hierarchical brotherhood where there's a top and there are levels underneath the top. To me, when I think about it, the ultimate brotherhood is a brotherhood of people who have continued in their life post-service and has gotten to a point where they can help others remember who they were as a service member, as a leader. That's the brotherhood of people I want to be a part of. To be able to get out, not live inside of the woe is me veteran mentality that a lot of people find themselves in, and to get yourself to a point to not only thrive as a veteran, but also in such a way that you can bring other people up with you, a servant leader, if you will. That is an infinite brotherhood of a very rare few that exist in my opinion, of the kinds of people that aren't just, they're not just doing more and being more. They're so good at suffering in their life that they're showing other people what they're capable of.
That is a good explanation. I have a question on that, but I want to hear Isaac's point answer to Sean's question first, and then I'm going to come back to you guys. What do you got, Isaac?
There's a dichotomy here that I'm caught between. And one is living true to like the spirit of your story, and the other one is a lack of story. Kind of like what Clay was saying at the beginning of, I don't need to know your story per se to understand and to have that bond of brotherhood. Just because there's something about your character that I'm tied to. But at the same time, there's something about the story and having a story that you can portray in a way that inspires others to find the good in their stories, to rise up to a specific level. And there's this dichotomy there that I'm caught between of, like, I believe that the brotherhood can transcend maybe a specific story, but the spirit that underlines that. And when we were joking around when we first came into the room, and Clay talking about opening his gym, and Sean's like, you need to show us what you're doing. You got to show us, and that's part of the story that could potentially show another veteran that, like, hey, you can do something with your life after this. And there's something about that personal story that can pull someone up. And when they do pull themselves up to join us in where we are, there's a sense of brotherhood that they feel that we've always known and maybe took for granted, that now they get to experience. And so I think my brain's caught between the two, and I think both are correct. But yeah, that's just where my thoughts were kind of heading.
I'm digging this, man. And to answer Sean's question with a question, I'm going to get a little bit of an explanation, then I want to get your guys' thoughts on it. To answer your question, Sean, I think what it is that it takes as many hits on that iron as it takes to find the purest example of yourself. And to Clay's point, to Isaac's point earlier, like, you got to get to a point where you are 100% you. No biases, no all the impurities of life and family and all the stuff that kind of comes with you when you join the military or start a new venture. Or you have to get to a point of difficulty, of suffering, where it is you at your core, where it is just you, 100% pure you. So however many times that takes, whether it's a course or whether it's 10, 15 years of service, or whether it's right as soon as you get to basic and you're like, oh man, I need to be better than this. So I think that's the start of it. But to Clay's point earlier, what he said to maintain the brotherhood is you got to become a mirror to that true self. You have to be able to show other people that they can get back there. So you kind of have to maintain yourself as that heated core of the knife. You have to keep going back in the forge, keep yourself red hot, keep yourself malleable to be able to show other people that were at some point that raw ore or that pure ore, to say, hey man, you can be that pure again, but you got to go through the fire, because after a certain amount of time outside of the fire, steel will oxidate. You start to get rust, you start to get impurities, you start to get things attaches it to the outside, and then you got to burn all that off again. So I want to get your guys' thought. Do you think that's an accurate analogy? Sean, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
Well, I like the idea, but I don't necessarily agree with your sequence of events. I don't think you have to get to the core in order to understand the process that you're in of making a sword called the Brotherhood. I think what you've got to do is, as you said, Chance, grab that hammer, bang on that steel enough that something changes, that you recognize that the state of the material has physically shifted, or notably or tangibly looks different, feels different, smells different, tastes different. It is different. I think that's what it takes. 100 strokes, 1,000 strokes, whatever, man. Just keep banging on that frickin' steel until you see a different color in it. All right, there's a layer. Time to get some more layers. That's the way I think of it. And so I'm still trying to get to my core. I'm still trying to bang out the impurities, but I got a few layers in my blade, you know? And so that's the way I think of it. And the more layers you can stack on, the more flexible you are, the more et cetera, et cetera. And so where do the layers come from? I believe that the layers are a kind of a two separate directional impactor. One is the internal and one is the external. And so I'm pretty regularly banging on my internal steel, and I'm pretty regularly banging on the external steel. Everyone gets it. I get it. The world gets it. I'll bang on it all until I get where I want to get, till I see what I want to see, till the metal changes a color that pleases me. And then I'll start banging on it on a different angle. I'll grab a different hammer. I'll go stand on the other side of the anvil and bang on it in that direction. I'll always be swinging, and I'll always be trying to make it better. And I'll always trying to do it from a different direction. And so I think that, you know, if anyone's relying on their past, let me retract that. If anyone is overly relying on their past to define themselves as they are a strong member of the Brotherhood, and that past is decades ago, and you haven't swung a hammer since, that's an important thing to consider. That's kind of one of the topics that I think we do have to touch on.
Let's dig into it. Isaac, gonna hit you. What do you think?
Yeah, this is a great talk, because there is a solo journey that we're all going through, and we have to be able to have that internal drive and internal, I guess, fortitude in order to, you know, impose some level of adversity on ourselves that is required to be better, that is required to improve. And if we stop doing that, then we stagnate. And, you know, maybe that's okay for somebody. Maybe someone wants to just, I've reached the level of comfort I want. I'm happy. I'm satisfied. This is enough. But everyone that they were in, I guess, a collective with, we can't expect them to stop. They're going to keep raising and leveling up. And at that point, we will fall out of the Brotherhood. And we might be able to play the part. We might be able to act a certain way. But at some point, it's going to be like, okay, it's been a while. What are you doing? Where are you at? What's going on? And like, I think there's an internal pruning process that needs to happen of like, what am I doing to improve myself and to level up? And there's also a pruning process of the Brotherhood, where the Brotherhood as a entity of itself wants to keep elevating, wants to keep raising, and you never rise to the level of, your belief, you fall to the level of the least common denominator. And so you're gonna kind of fall to the level of the person who just doesn't care. And so I think with Sean, it's an internal kind of hammering of the iron to improve, but it's also understanding that the collective brotherhood is its own, hammer. And at some point you might get chipped off. You might be part of the iron that's broken off to make the sword sharper. And you don't want that. So you have to keep, doing your own internal work. And with that, really joining arms with the others that are doing the internal work to make the collective group continue to rise.
That's a good point. What do you got, Sean?
I just got to jump in real quick, and I'm not going to steal much time because I know Clay's probably buzzing to get something in there. And I just wanted to reinforce the importance of that point that Isaac just made, and I'm paraphrasing now, that just because you clocked in, and I'm using different words now, your new job is you're part of that awesome Brotherhood team that you just joined. You clock in, ching, ching, just like the Flintstones. You walk in, and then you never clock out, but you never do anything once you clock in. And so you can't clock in and be in the Brotherhood forever and not help out, not push the pace, not make it better, not kick that ass. You can't clock in, do some hard work, clock out, and then take your time card, put it down on your living room table and think that that time card there 20 years ago and now 20 years later is giving you any special privileges of you were in the Brotherhood and you were kicking that ass, and where have you been for the last 20 years? I don't think that conferred you're the Brotherhood member lasts forever. I don't think it's an immortal or an eternal title. I think it's one you've got to earn, not one that you just get to keep. I don't think it's a little sticker that you get on your left shoulder that says, I'm a proud member of. I think it's something that says I'm an earned member of. And that earned aspect is kind of critical, because not only is it a case of you then understand what collectives or what memberships or what brotherhoods you really want to be in versus the ones that you think you are in. You'll understand the ones that you are in if you have to earn your way in them. And I mean, not just earn your way into them, but I mean, when you're in them, earn your way in them. Earn every day, earn your seat at the table, as the old saying was. And so I think that understanding that the membership aspect isn't an eternal free title. You got to earn it every day. It's pretty important, man.
Yeah, totally agree on that one. And actually, I know a lot of dudes, I see this on Instagram all the time of like, oh, I miss the Brotherhood. Oh, I miss the teams. Oh, I miss being back on the thing. Or I remember being back overseas and I miss that crew. And it's like, well, you can still be that guy. You just you don't need to be in that circumstance to be that guy. But I think really what people want is to be that who they were back then, rather than do the work to be that person now.
So what was that chance? What? So what was that, or what is that? Because I've seen it too many times to count. Exactly what you just described. In fact, it kind of irks me a little bit. I have to look away from it sometimes because it just bums me out that they can still be that, but they don't want to be that, but they still want to be that. And so, what was that? What in their mind were they? And whatever it was that they think they were, it had to have been worthy. It had to have been like something that was like, yes, I was that. And what was that?
I think it's exactly what you're just saying, is that it's earned. It's one of the few things in life that they can look at and say, I earned this. And everything else is just like, well, I got it, or, I have this job, or I married this girl, or, I had some kids, or it was never earned, like being overseas in Afghanistan or in Iraq or wherever a lot of the GWOT guys were. That's what they miss, is the fact that it was earned. And it was earned every day when you stepped out on patrol and you're like, my life is on the line here, and so is the life of all my guys. I have to earn my place here, now, right here. And I think that's what it is. They just don't know how to do that here in life, in regular life, because there's no threat of life or limb, or there's no perceived threat of life or limb, I should say. At least that's what I'm thinking.
And I love that. And it's kind of where I'm tracking as well. In fact, you just kind of read my mind. So then if that's the case, it's really a misdirected sense of where they are right now and how they can change that in a split second of getting back in that game. They just haven't defined their game. The game back then was someone told you to go kick that ass. The game today is now you've got to tell yourself to go kick that ass. It's easy for someone. It was easy for me as a young man to have someone say, get on top of that hill now. All right, let's go. But then when you're the guy telling yourself that there's a hill way over there and that you're the only one in your head saying you've got to go do it, it is a different thing. Is that the disconnect?
In my mind, it is. Clay, what do you think?
Phew. Yeah. How to motivate people, service members who you're in the brotherhood of saying, yeah, you served, but you're not in the brotherhood of continual actually, I think it's just knowing that the brotherhood, or you yourself as an individual, is a continuous process that never ends. It doesn't end because you served. It doesn't end because you made it through Afghanistan. It doesn't end because of this or because of that. Like your past, to Sean's point, you were that, but if you just, I was an Army veteran, but now I just identify as I was that. And you don't take all of the adversity, all of the lessons, all of the people who maybe died in Afghanistan or in Iraq, or that you suffered along with. If you take all of those experiences and you just leave it behind you and don't use it to move forward as a new person each day, and prune off all of the things that did you no good, then you kind of you're still in the brotherhood of a service member, but are you in the brotherhood of continued willful growth as a human being? And I think that's what a lot of us, when I see Sean, me and him joked the other day of he's 60, and I'm 38, and I was joking with him. I'm like, you might outlive me, and he was like, game on. So it's like there's an intrinsic quality there of this person who was a Pathfinder, was JTF2, was all of these things, but he also still is, because he didn't leave all of that behind him. He didn't leave it back there and just, oh, it was an experience. Well, that was cool. It's he's taking the experience of our past, of our adversity, of our trauma, and we're using it to catapult us forward in a positive way rather than a negative way. And to me, that's another ingredient of the continued brotherhood. It's like, hey, I'm a continued piece of steel that will never ever be forged to the malleability, to the strength, to the sharpness, but I accept that. And I will continue to strive to be that perfect blade, even though I know it may never happen. That is a sort of brotherhood of people that are different, but are the ones that we respect, admire, and want to be a part of, like, continuously.
Mm-hmm. I just had this image in my head. You're kind of describing Schrodinger's knife, really, at this point. Is that it can be multiple states of the same thing at any given time. It just, so you could be a knife, you could be a sword, you could be a friggin' rod, you could be a bat, you could be a stat. Like, you have the capability to do any of those things, but you're never fully forged into that and locked into place. This is I'm digging this. This is awesome. Isaac, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, my brain goes into like comic book mode, like the multiverse, and we have this experience, and then we ourselves, our consciousness continues on, but then there's a version of us that continued on this path. And for me, I think it's really just understanding potential and living out that potential and finding a mission worth fighting for. And I say this because just my own personal experience. I went through a specialty school. I extended my contract, went through a specialty school to get selected for a specific kind of unit, and had the opportunity, but went to get my medical checkups done, and they were like, "Yeah, not gonna happen." And so I continued on, but part of me, always thought about that version of myself. And I was always comparing myself to that version that never was allowed to exist and thinking like, man, how cool it would have been to really be the operator, to really do that thing that's like the Super Bowl version of what I've always wanted to do. And for the longest time, I battled that and didn't feel like I was a part of the Brotherhood because I wasn't that version of myself. But once I realized like that's not going to happen, that's never going to happen, but I can reach my potential peak in something else that still does good for people, that still helps people, that still includes the community that I wanted to be a part of. And suddenly that compare and contrast ended in my mind. I no longer like, yes, I still think it would have been cool, but I no longer compare myself to that non-existent version of myself that is in a jungle somewhere doing cool stuff that you can't like that just it didn't happen. And I can be mad about it. I can be upset about it. I can front like I'm something I'm not, but eventually, the Brotherhood understands that. So instead it's like I need to find a mission outside of that makes me feel like I'm working towards my potential. And it's something that maybe is never attained, but it's something I'm going to strive for. And that I think is something where within the Brotherhood, we have to look at, what's the mission we're on now? And is it something that's calling us higher in comparison to what we used to be? Because if we don't have something now that beats the peak potential of what we used to be, then we have to be like okay with like Sean's great at being able to be like, I've left that, but I haven't left that. It's carried with me. And I understand that there's a peak potential of everything that I do that I'm going to strive for. But if Sean didn't strive for that peak potential of everything that he did, then maybe there would be a part of him that always compared to that one thing a long time ago. But it's that mindset of like, no, there's a new peak. There's a new peak. There's a new peak that allows us to use what we went through to strive for more.
John, what do you got?
I like it. But I have to add a little bit of clarity because Isaac, I know that you're not assuming things that you shouldn't be. You're kind of thinking it through in real time, as it were, and as am I right now. So I might be a little off base, but I will say this: that generally is how I've run my life. However, there is another piece to it, and I don't think I'm unique to this extra piece. I think that everyone has to face this, and I don't think it'll ever go away for me, and I don't think it'll ever go away for everyone else. And that is, like your story, as a JTF2 operator, if that's considered the Super Bowl of the sport, then I didn't really get to throw a whole bunch of touchdowns. You know what I'm saying? Like, I got to do some stuff, but I didn't get to do all the stuff. And so, like, how much time, like, was I the water boy? And so is that enough? And so these are things that I have puzzled on for decades, of course. And it's made me think of a little story that perhaps will help round this idea off for everyone. It's not that I'm looking for some sort of like soothing balm to rub on my little belly and think, oh, okay, that takes away all of the problems. Life is full of problems, man. Like this dilemma that we're talking about right now, I don't think one side of it or the other side of it completely disappears. I think there's always going to be tension or friction or stickiness to that idea that I could have been that, but I went over there instead. There is for me anyway. So here's a story on Brotherhood that isn't about the military, because I think that Brotherhood exists all around us in military and non-military aspects, of course. And it doesn't have to be like a big deal Brotherhood. It doesn't have to be like, you know, you've done all of the things together or etc. I was at a world championship in Australia, 24-hour solo, and that was in 2010. And I was 22 hours or 21 hours into the race, and my seat post snapped in half. And so at that point, I was hanging out pretty solidly on the podium. And when it snapped, I lost some time. And then I had to ride about 45 minutes, race 45 minutes, with my seat post in one jersey pocket and my saddle in the other jersey pocket, and just riding like a lunatic and almost kind of unsafe to try to claw back time to solidify the position that I wanted. Now, the word got up the course to my team in the pits. And so that means that as I rolled into the World Championship pit area, there was a bunch of people there that were ready to treat me like a Formula One race car. Like, all I had time to do was roll up, apply my brakes, put both legs on the ground, and I just stood there hovering my arse over the non-existent seat post. And I didn't move because there was a bunch of people that attacked me to solve the problem, to include my wife and our two boys who were there supporting me in Australia. They were there to like do all of the things. And then there was people who I was actually competing against in that race. Their pit crews came over to help out. And then a dude who I'd been competing against who DNF'd or did not finish, he just hammered it in. It was a hot race. It was a hard race. And, you know, he almost made it to the finish, but he didn't. And so like he just kind of wrapped it up to some degree. He came over with his own personal seat post and saddle, and like he was adjusting it for me, the height. I just stood there and he said, "How's that?" And I said, "It's good to go, Steve. Thanks." And he said, "Put your arse on it and give her." That's what I did. He was another Canadian, cool as hell. And so, like, that was a brotherhood in and of itself. A bunch of disparate people who some I didn't even know, that were brought together through the common bond of the moment, the commonality of the adversity, the understanding of how bonkers it is to race 20 odd hours and then come in with no saddle and seat post. It's Looney Tunes. But you only understand the levity of the moment or the weight of the moment if you've like ridden a bike a really long time and really hard. Like the people who've done that, as I roll in, they understand how bonkers it is. And they wrap themselves around me like a brotherhood. And so what is brotherhood? You know, is it just the person or persons that are right in the thick of it, always sweating and bleeding? Or is it the people who are lined up alongside of them? And I don't want to call it support, but the people who are there in the moment with you, who really are in the moment with you. Is that brotherhood? I don't know.
This is a really good question, and I'm going to come to Clay here in a second on this, but I just want to give you my thoughts on it. And I think it comes down to something we said earlier about the core. And I really do think this, when you start to know who you truly are, without all the stories, without all the things that we conceptualize and kind of overlap ourselves with, when you understand who you are, you can see it in other people. And it's like your core values, your very, very base values of who you are and what you believe in. And you see somebody that is absolutely giving it all they have, and something happens, your seat snaps off, and you're like, that is a hard way to fit. I would not want that to happen to me. I have an extra seat. I'm already out of the game. Bam, here you go. Give her, keep going. Because you can you can taste it in the air, right? When you see somebody else that is really hammering. I had when I was doing the Nijmegen last summer on my own, just walking around my town, just rucking around. I had a buddy of mine hit me up on Facebook, and he was like, dude, I did the Nijmegen in Holland years ago, and I don't know how you're doing it by yourself. Like, there are thousands of people that are over there doing it all together, and they, cheer each other on, and they help each other, and they give each other stuff, and they're all part of that team. But when you're all like by yourself and you're just in your head doing something bonkers hard, it's a different game. But when I was doing it, I had people who would walk up beside me, and they'd be like, hey man, what are you up to? And I'd be like, oh, I'm doing this challenge. I'm just pushing myself, see how I can do it. And they'd be like, right on, man. And they'd give me some knucks, and off I'd go. And they'd kind of fade back in the own. But you'd get a little glimmer of that shared value of like, okay, I see you deep down there. I see you. Clay, you got any thoughts on this?
No, I'm still kind of back in that big question of, what was the separation between the people who live in that past of who they were, and you guys are kind of hitting on it too, and then what drives people forward. But the most interesting thing so far is so you have Sean, you have Isaac, and both guys to someone who has never done anything in the service but wish they would look at you both and be like, wow, like these two guys, they even are considering, what could I have done? Who could I have been? And that's fascinating, because I've also struggled with that same exact thing, and not on the same level, obviously, but in some way. So it almost makes me think of that, to the existential question of us is who are we? Well, I think inside of who are you, who am I, there is the conflict of what could I have been? Who could I have been? And I think that question can paralyze people and prevent them from being more. And they get stuck there. They get stuck in, I could have been this, or I was this, but now I'm just this. So who am I? So that, to me, it's like illuminating. It's almost identifying maybe a core question that a lot of people may need to think about and answer for themselves is am I just what I did in the past, or am I just what I could have been, or could there be more? And I think most of us, or the people in the Brotherhood that we're talking about, they strive towards the radical acceptance of, I wasn't that, but I'm going towards something else. And that, I think, is the shift, or the path of identifying, who am I now, post-service, or as a veteran. But yeah, those are my thoughts in the moment.
I'm digging it, man. Isaac, what do you got?
Yeah, I love that. And it's something that I do. To go back, I when Sean was kind of, talking about my first point, we were exactly on the same page. Like, I feel like everyone kind of looks at their situation and says, like, man, there's a version of me that went all the way with this. And in reality, it's just a story that we tell ourselves, because there is no real peak of that. And if we look at what that peak is, especially in this type of community, oftentimes if we take it to its extreme, that peak is like, we died somewhere to save our friends. Like, that's the peak. And to compare ourselves against that kind of false reality is not fair to our present selves and to our family. And so then it goes into, as Clay said, looking at who am I now? But I think the important thing is to have a recalibration of saying, okay, who can I become? Not who I was, not who I could have been. Who can I become from this point, from now? And I think it's that spirit of becoming that causes a new brotherhood. Because, with Sean bringing up the race in Australia and how that group kind of came in to support, and there was a brotherhood there. Part of that, I believe, is seeing that you are giving everything you have and going through extra pain and extra adversity for a mission that you're on. And to see a, fellow Canadian or a father or a husband going through this pain for a mission that you're on caused a almost spiritual, like, I don't know, coming together to see that mission through. And for us, whenever we decide, like, hey, there's something that I truly believe in that we can build and that we can create, and I'm going to dedicate everything I have and everything I am into seeing this come through, suddenly people start joining in and people start saying, like, I believe in that too. And, Clay talking about the core values and Sean talking about the core values that we have, like, we see people start coming in that have those same core values and believe in what we believe, that want to see the mission we're on succeed. And suddenly a new brotherhood forms. And I think that's a beautiful thing of brotherhood. Is it's not so much what I could have become, it's who can I become. And when I truly commit to that, people start coming together to see that mission forward. And it's this new brotherhood that forms.
Beautiful. Yeah, Clay, man, what do you got? I saw you had the epiphany.
So tell me what you guys think about this. So let's think of it as, so there's this thing. It's an infinite thing that never goes away. It's a set of ideals and values that anyone can recognize across the board of a kind of way of being that we all respect and identify. And inside of that, there are groups of people who they stay in that brotherhood. They're there. But it's not this exclusionary thing. It's this thing that people can kind of fall out of and then they can come back into. And you kind of see that, right? You'll have a veteran, let's say, that lost their way for a little bit, but then they come into jiu-jitsu per se, and they kind of start to rekindle that, oh, this is who I am. So the brotherhood isn't an exclusionary place that you're either in or you're not in. It's like there are certain people who just hold that together because they live the values of the brotherhood. They live it. They've lived it their whole lives and they know nothing else. And they hold that strand of brotherhood together so that the people that lose their way can find their way back to that place. They can find it, because without those people that hold that brotherhood together, and sometimes we fall off, sometimes we go in and out of it, those who lost themselves would never be able to come back to the brotherhood without those people. And so it's like this place that is never ending. It's a large entity of values and characteristics that always exists. People just come in or out of it, but most of the time we hold it together for each other in a lot of ways. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? That's what
I'm tracking. It reminds me of the phalanx, right? Like, I'll hold my shield and my spear, and if people start lining up on my left, friggin' wicked, right? But I'm still going to hold that line regardless. And I'm digging this a lot. Sean, what do you think?
It's interesting that you thought of it that way, Chance, because that makes that changes things a little bit for me in the sense of what I was getting from Clay, but I appreciate it because it gives it it gives it a bit of a hard angle context, which I'll get into in a sec. So, Clay, I agree with you, man. Like, I think that at some point in our young lives, we learned what brotherhood was. And that doesn't mean that brotherhood then and the brotherhoods that I'm in now are the same. They're not. And I'll go so far as to say, once you're in a brotherhood, it doesn't mean that you're always in a brotherhood. And if you fall out of the brotherhood, you're always welcome back into the brotherhood, because I don't think that's the case either. And I'll go so far as to say that there are some brotherhoods that are so secretive and so, constricted and so confined. And so if you haven't thrown 1001 hand grenades, you can't be in the brotherhood. But if you've thrown 1,000, there's another brotherhood for you over there. But we draw the line at 1001. That's how you get in. Like, there's exclusionary brotherhoods. And that's not healthy either. I think that the brotherhoods that are formed on attributes, that are formed on core values, that are formed on if you're a good person or not, those are the kind of brotherhoods that I'm into. If the brotherhood is formed on your spear is 6 feet long versus 4 feet long, go down to Walmart and buy a 7-foot long spear, Now you're in the Brotherhood of 6-foot spears. It doesn't make any sense to me, these tiny little variables, these little almost inconsequential metrics that define a brotherhood. Oh, you've got the shiny one? Well, you get to be in our brotherhood. You've got the dull one? No, the dull membership is down the road. I don't agree with that. I don't think it should be based on how much you can afford to spend. I don't think it should be based on what color your shoes are. It shouldn't have anything to do with the kind of person you are. That's, to me, what brotherhoods are formed on. Who you are at your core. Are you cool or do you suck? And so if it's about who you are as a person, then I feel that rather than falling in and out of brotherhoods, Clay, to some degree, what I heard from you is you kind of flow through brotherhoods, as it were. And like, maybe if you're a person who moves through brotherhoods, if you can forge new brotherhoods, generally speaking, is people will remain in your close trajectory. And I'm not talking like an asteroid pulling along a bunch of space dust with it. I'm talking about like people will move into your trajectory because they recognize you've got a trajectory. And people will also move out of your trajectory only to come back into it years later. That's what I've observed in life. So all of the brotherhoods that I have been in, of like several collectives that I'm in currently, like the nerd collective, the computer collective, the whatever, all of the collectives that I'm currently today in, including this one, they all have their own little widgets, their own little beanie hats that you wear as kind of like a symbolism of your in that brotherhood. But in my mind, in my soul, I believe that all of these brotherhoods are way less about the sparkly baubles that signify you're in the brotherhood, and it's way more about the shiny bauble in the center of your chest that defines whether you're actually in the brotherhood or not.
Isaac, what are you thinking?
Yeah, it brings me back to the spirit of the mission. And when you're striving for something, people will believe in that and they'll gravitate towards it, and a brotherhood will form. And I guarantee there's someone, and I think part of this is consistency. I appreciate Clay talking about kind of, some people will leave the brotherhood, but also for myself, and I'm speaking for myself when I give context to that will happen, but it doesn't happen like a daily or weekly thing. It's like at some point maybe someone burns out and they back out, but then something pulls them back in. It's not like I'm in the brotherhood for a day and then I leave and then I come back and then I leave and then I come back. That doesn't happen. Those people I don't believe were ever in the brotherhood, but it's like I was doing this for years and now like life happened. I backed out, got comfortable, and then something in me, maybe seeing Clay train on the mats every day, made me want to do jujitsu again. And boom, now I'm back in the brotherhood. And I guarantee there's someone who listens to this every single Wednesday, every single Friday, asks questions every time you ask for them, comments on every single thing, shares every video, and they were never in the military. Does that mean they're not part of the collective brotherhood? No, they absolutely are. They absolutely are. If you're the person listening to this, that's like raising your hand, like that's me, you're a part of the collective brotherhood. You didn't have to go through crap in Afghanistan to be a part of the brotherhood. You are conversing and commuting and being a part of the, growth of this journey that Chance and Sean are building, that we're all a part of. You're a part of that brotherhood. So I do think it's part of like seeing something like the collective and the mission that you guys are on to grow this and to help and to get, voices out that maybe otherwise wouldn't ever be heard. And people gravitate to that. Like, I want to support that. I love that you guys are doing this, and I want to ask questions, and I want to help, and I want to share. And that creates a new brotherhood.
You're 100% right. So just recently, actually last week, my godmother passed away, and it was interesting because I was talking to my mother about this a little while ago, and she was like, I have to contact people. She was her best friend for decades, and she's like, I don't know who to engage. There's like the people that I knew that we all hung out with in our circle, but then there's also, she was an opera singer, so there's all of the orchestras and all the people she sang with, and then but she was also a member of the community, and who do you touch to on that? And it reminded me that we have multiple brotherhoods that we're all a part of, that none of us within a particular brotherhood know anything about the other brotherhood, right? And I think this is another interesting point in that it's never just one. It's never just one. We have communities here, we have communities over there. Well, let me say, I hope it's not just one, because I do know a lot of people who only has ever had one brotherhood. And to my point from earlier, Sean, you asked about it, was that's what people miss, because they only have the one. They only ever had the one. And they've never taken the time to start building it in other areas. And I think that's a key point to this, is that it requires a breadth of brotherhoods. It requires a grouping of different pieces of your own life to find your true self, to then give that true self to each one of those brotherhoods. So I think it's a really interesting point here. And I want to hit on a different angle here quickly, but I want to see if there's any thoughts before we do.
Yeah, because you propose something there, and I think it's a good proposition. But okay, so we can't just gloss over it without an action point. You only had one brotherhood, and that was 20 years ago. Now you don't have any brotherhoods, but you think you're still in that brotherhood, but you're never gonna got another brotherhood. So if the point is you're only in one, but you need more, what about the middle position of how do they do that? Because if they haven't done it for the last 20 years, what is it? How is it? When is it going to be done? And so let's just think about that for a sec. If you were in a brotherhood for a period of time where you considered that you are part of a brotherhood, but that was back in the day and a long time ago, now what? How? I will say this. Let me phrase it as this question. I believe that if you're certainly in your middle ages, if you're 30 years old or more, you should have been taught by now how to enter into and earn your way within a brotherhood. And so you've done it once. Then the question becomes, if you can build that bridge once, how do you build the bridge again?
That's a very good question. I'm going to bring it to Clay. What do you think, man?
This is good because it kind of gets me to a place where I can hone in on the kind of the concept that I was talking about. So let's just say the bridge, it's built off of these particular types of material, and there are 100 brotherhoods, but at the top of all of those are these, we could probably identify them if we really took the time, of values or materials that build that bridge. And you could go integrity, you could say willful adversity, respect, honor. So just to name those 5 as an example of the materials that it takes to build this bridge. Well, if you lose your way, you lose some integrity, you lose some self-respect. We'll say self-respect is number 6. If you lose self-respect, you kind of fall out of that brotherhood, right? You kind of start to disintegrate your bridge. And until you find a way to respect yourself again, or to give honor to yourself, or some integrity, your bridge will collapse, and it will collapse piece by piece by piece. So the brotherhood, in my perspective, or the way I'm trying to convey it, is those major pieces of material or components that we all respect as veterans, or as men, even if you will, or women, their character traits, their ideals of being that keep you moving and progressing as a human. So that bridge is built of those materials, and you can fall out of that brotherhood because you lose parts of yourself. But without those of us, like that continue to maintain that integrity, that honor, that respect off of all of the experiences that we had, the brotherhood would disintegrate as a whole, but it doesn't, because there are people who maintain that level of virtue as a warrior, or as whatever word you want to use. And so some people fall out, but some people come back in. But the bridge will never completely collapse as long as there's a Sean, as long as there's an Isaac, as long as there's people who are willing to maintain that level of again, willful adversity, or of grit, of determination, of just facing and radically accepting that you're not who you are, or you're not who you were. You're not just the past. You are a continuous evolution of falling out of being what you were, and then refining it all over again. Yeah.
I'm digging that. It brings to mind back to the forging analogy of like different types of steel have different types of ingredients in them, right? So some have a higher carbon content, some don't, et cetera, et cetera. But as they're forged, if they don't have those pieces, then they'll become brittle and fall apart. So interesting. Isaac, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think this is great. Because what Clay talked about is like the value system that creates a brotherhood. And, someone might come into a brotherhood and live out those values, but then one of those values starts to disintegrate. And, maybe, life is going to life for all of us. And maybe life hits someone a little bit too hard. And that value of, honor or courage or self self kind of discipline, I guess, starts to decay a little bit, and they leave the brotherhood. Doesn't mean the brotherhood falls apart, because there's other people that are holding the line and keeping it true. And oftentimes it'll take people in the brotherhood to reach back down and help pull them up. And I think that's why, it's the differentiator between a brotherhood and a community, because you can be in a community and not be a part of it. It takes actual effort to not be a part of the brotherhood. Like it takes being like, leave me the heck alone. I just want to be left alone. And even then, people in the brotherhood are going to be like, no, you don't, dude. Come on. Like, let's go. Let's, go out to eat. Let's, do whatever, let's just go do hood rat stuff with our friends for a few minutes. Like it takes effort to be like, dude, just leave me alone. And I think we have to maybe do at least a little bit of due diligence to separate just being a part of a community and being a part of a brotherhood. Because I do think that there is a underlying difference there, where you can be a part of a community, and that's great. And that community can have a sense of brotherhood in it, but there still might be people of that community that aren't necessarily part of the brotherhood. And when you're part of a brotherhood, I can tell you, like, there were times where I was really battling some demons. And I had, really close, what I would call brothers, who were a part of, that brotherhood, who wouldn't let me just go, take my depression to the extreme. They were like, no, like, you're going to have to go out kicking and screaming, because we're going to drag you like this whole way. And I'm happy they did. Right. That's brotherhood, to me. And so I do think that there's layers of brotherhood where it's like, I could have never met Clay, but as soon as I know that he's an Army veteran, there's a sense of brotherhood there. But then there's a layer, deeper, where it's the collective. And everyone who's a part of the collective, there's like a sense of brotherhood that's a little bit layer, deeper. And then there's, something under that that's a core brotherhood, where it's like, it's going to take effort to get out of this brotherhood, because they're going to hold me to a standard that I've committed myself to. And so I do think there's layers to brotherhood and a separation between brotherhood and community.
I'm glad you made the distinction, because I actually had a question here later on that I was going to add in here of like, what's the difference between a collective and a brotherhood? This is it's interesting too, and it reminds me of the Starship Troopers book, of the difference between a citizen and a civilian. And there's a great line in the movie. I'm pretty sure it's in the book. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I read it. I probably should read it again. Where Rico is defining what it is to be a citizen versus a civilian. He says that it is a citizen makes it a personal responsibility to uphold the safety of the human race, or whatever it is. And I think that's that's the key point, is that in the brotherhood, it's a personal responsibility to uphold the brotherhood. We accept it within ourselves to maintain it, but without other people doing it as well. Like, we all have to be a part of that brotherhood. Otherwise, it's just a single person doing something. I liken it to, you guys have all done, we called them airborne push-ups, where you have your feet on the person's shoulders behind you and you make a circle, and then you're just all doing push-ups together. None of that works unless everybody's doing it to the fullest extent of them doing it. And I think that's the key. That's the separator. You make it a personal responsibility to uphold them. Otherwise, it's just yeah, cool. It'd be nice to hang out in the community and like watch other people do push-ups, and I'm going to do my push-ups over here, versus being all locked in together. My view. Sean, what do you think?
So, since we're talking about swords and layers of swords and stuff, I do want to throw something in here that will maybe challenge people, maybe challenge the panel. Who knows? So, as part of the sword making process, you have to quench the blade, a cooling down process with water. And so, without getting into the particulars of that, Chance had mentioned that, sometimes you mix in different levels of steel or different alloys or different elements of carbon, or the various heats and the quenching. It's quite a complex process if you want to make a really good blade. And so here's my thought on the quenching aspect of blades, while still relating it back to the main topic at hand, brotherhood. We've already said that one of the aspects of brotherhood is engaging in adversity, being the person to your left and right is in the hurt locker with you. You know that you've suffered together. It's that silent nod of, we went pretty deep on that one, and therefore I can count on you, you can count on me. We've already kind of loosely talked about that. That's the crucible, as it were, as it's often called, the crucible. Now, you can be in the crucible, but you can also fall in love with the crucible. Those are two very different things. You can be right up in it, and like, you've got no other choice. You've got to be in it. But then once you get a taste for the crucible, you start to look for the crucible in everything. And so I'm just proposing this idea, this theme, that you've got to keep an eye on yourself. I've got to keep an eye on me. I'll tell you that when it comes to the crucible, because I love the crucible. I've fallen in love with the crucible. And so I have to keep myself in check. I think of the water quenching aspect of the blade. That's me having to step back from my love affair with the crucible that I'm involved in at that moment, stepping back and doing a little bit of namaste time. And I'm not talking about 2 or 3 minutes. I'm talking about I've got to sit back, maybe for a few days, and get some perspective with some meditation or some different reading or listening to different music, talking to different friends, looking at different sunsets, whatever, man. Figure it out. But find a way to make it different instead of same old, I'm in love with the crucible, I love the hurt locker, bring on the fiery heat. Because everything has to be heated and everything has to be quenched. So that's me playing with your sword analogy.
Ooh, let's go around the table on this one. Clay, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I don't think there's much I could add to it. It's falling in love with the crucible kind of goes back to that whole, why some people they get paralyzed by only thinking about who they were and not who they could be. Maybe they don't spend enough time cooling their sword, and they're thinking, I just got to go, I just got to do, I just got to be this, I just got to do that, and that turns into working, some job that you didn't like, but you're still paying the bills, and then it turns into, I'm going to sacrifice my health and myself and become overweight and obese, but I'm still working those 12-hour shifts, and they fall in love with the crucible in a way that is almost, negative, and not falling in love with the crucible in a way that they learn from the experiences of doing the difficult things. And also learning that in doing those difficult things, you have to take a minute to, as Sean put it, contemplate and reflect on, maybe working these 12-hour shifts at the detriment of my own health isn't being there for my family, and I'm falling in love with the wrong crucible or the wrong aspect of the crucible. So, when I hear Sean saying that, I can kind of relate, and that's where my mind kind of goes with it a little bit. That falling in love with the crucible part is a good one. I like it.
I'm digging it, Isaac. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I have some internal conflict with it, and I agree with it 100%. But then there's a part of me that stubbornly doesn't want to agree with it. And I think of Icarus, and for the listeners, right, or the watchers who don't understand, like Icarus was essentially a slave whose dad built him wings out of wax to escape from slavery. And he said, don't fly too high, because if you do, the sun will melt your wings and you'll fall. And essentially that's where we stop the story. We say, don't fly too high, because it's to tell us to be humble. But the actual story, the father tells him, don't fly too low either, because you'll be too close to the water, and the water will harden up your wings and you'll fall and you'll drown. And so there's somewhere in between this that we have to find that happy medium. And for me, it's like I fell in love with the crucible. And it, for me, that's like business and thinking, what's next? What can we do? How can we move forward? And I think that there's something about the people who fall in love with the crucible, that they become the creators of Brotherhood, and people do gravitate to that. But then there's a certain point in time where you take it too far and it becomes toxic. And, I myself have allowed, that point to, I've flirted with that line quite often. And it often takes, my wife, I love her to death, will sit me down and be like, hey, dummy, like, pull yourself out of your butt here, like, and realize there's other people around. And so there is this line where the people who love the crucible, I believe they do become creators of new brotherhoods. But we have to check ourselves and have that quenching process to where we don't allow it to become toxic to those who don't have a choice to be in. Like, my wife is in this brotherhood, prolific. She doesn't have a choice. She's in it and she supports it. But at the same time, if I let it get to the point of being toxic, it's not toxic for the other people who aren't in it 24/7, who aren't with me 24/7. It's toxic to her. It's toxic to my daughter, right? And like, that's not good. So there does have to be a quenching period to where it doesn't hurt the ones that we need the most as the creators of the brotherhood.
I feel you, and I agree with you. My wife is the same boat. She's part of the collective, but she's outside the collective at the same time, and what happens on the collective affects her very regularly. There's been a couple of times where I've come out of a show, and after Sean has given me a solid friggin' knife hand and telling me what needs to be done, and I've come out of that just like, oh man, and she's got to deal with the aftermath of that, where I have to sit and think and ponder on all these things. But I love how you brought this up of Icarus and the fact that, and I'm going to bring it back to the forging process. If you get a metal too hot, it's no longer malleable, it's liquid. You can't use it at that point, right? And I wanted to bring this also to a point Clay made earlier about those values that we all try to adhere to, we all try to attain, right? You got integrity and trust and honor and all these things. But if you seek all of those to such a degree, everything has a cost, right? Is loyalty eventually is going to cost integrity? Or is your honor going to cost you a relationship? Or is like anything that taken to the extreme, you're going to fly to the sun, it's going to cost something else. And you got to ask yourself, are you willing to pay for it? Are you willing to pay that cost in order to get that thing? So one of the questions I wanted to ask earlier, the little change that I was going to make, was the dangers of the Brotherhood. And I mean, I don't know how many of you guys have heard this, but like I used to say it pretty regularly, was an army brother or an army friend, I could call at 3:00 in the morning and say, show up here with a shovel and some malai. And they'd be like, Roger that. And they'd show up. No questions, no nothing, right? But that has a cost, right? If they have a family, if they have a life, if they don't need to get involved in that kind of stuff. But some people will depend on that loyalty, and it will, like you said, make it very toxic. So I want to touch a little bit more on the dangers of this, where this could go negatively for a lot of people. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple of things in there that are kind of tricky. The first one that comes to mind is the loyalty aspect of someone calling me at 3:00 in the morning with that list of demands, and I haven't heard from them in 25 years. Do you know how long that conversation's going to last? Is this a prank call? Prank call, prank call. And I'm freaking hanging up, because I don't want to be in that conversation with someone that I don't know anymore, just because we wore green together at one point. That isn't enough for me. And so they would have to be like a super duper tight friend as part of the Brotherhood, not just they've got a little Velcro patch that says Brotherhood on it that they get to take off and put on 25 years later. So that's my first thought. Because like if we're talking about digging a hole, we're not talking about baking a cake. You know what I'm saying? And so I think for me, if you've got a big ask, we better have shook hands recently. And that's kind of important. And that flies against the mythology that exists on the internet, that because we shined boots together 30 years ago once, that you can call me up at 3:00 in the morning all these years later and say, let's go dig a hole. That's laughable. But it is a mythology that is almost entrenched in the internet, like it's a thing. And I want to dispel that mythology. I want to dispel that rumor, or whoever started it, that thinks, and if anyone out there thinks that they can call me in the middle of the night and to do something of significance just because, you're wrong. And no one ever should, by the way. These kind of things that we're talking about, where there is a strong reliance on a need of a strong friendship, should be based on friendships, should be based on brotherhoods, not a vague term that is universally and nebulously applied against decades ago service. That doesn't work for me. I don't need to have served alongside someone in the military uniform to support them in their time of need at 3:00 in the morning. I'll always do that if they've been beside me for long enough, and recently long enough, that I know who they are, and that they know if they're calling me at 3 in the morning, they've taken into consideration my costs. Because it'll cost me at 3:00 in the morning the risks that I'll take, but it'll also frickin' cost them, because I'll have an ask. It won't just be you're calling me up out of the blue years later and asking me to do that. I'll have an ask of you. It can't just be a one-way highway, and it never has been for me. It's always two-way. You want a big ask? There'll be a big take reciprocally later. And I don't know what that'll be. And it doesn't matter what it is. But I do believe that it can't just be someone reaches out of the blue just because, period.
You'd have to have a solid "you owe me." Clay, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, so it reminds me, I worked for a long period of time, and I still do, every now and then, in like a Medicaid, Medicare, addiction facility. So very, very, people are there because they're either court appointed, or there's jail time hanging over their head, or they literally have no money, and it's like 3 weeks of a hot meal and a roof over their head. But the strangest thing happens, and I've noticed this, and I don't know what to call it, and there's probably someone out there who's identified it, but you'll see these people who like have came from all these different walks of life, and they'll start calling each other these very endearing and powerful names. So like a older lady will essentially claim this young girl as her daughter, and they'll call each other that. They'll like call each other mother and daughter, and it's very strange because it's like they're almost trauma bonding, or I'm not really sure what it is. And it kind of reminds me of what Sean's saying is in the same way people can use that word brotherhood as almost like this weapon to say, I'm going to call you in the middle of the night, and aren't you a part of the brotherhood? Aren't you going to help me, mother, daughter? Aren't you going to give me some of those things that I'm after in this addiction clinic that are not so good for me? And they use these words and these terms that are powerful, and they use it as a weapon. And to me, that's what it sounded like Sean was kind of saying in some way, is that sometimes people can use these words or these things such as a brotherhood and almost use them in a detrimental way against people to their own end as the individual. And it would seem like a thing to worry about, or a possible danger, to your point, is when people use something as strong as brotherhood to meet their individual own end and not the betterment of the whole entire group. I think one thing we can say we've probably all learned, and a defining characteristic of military service, is not being selfish, it's being selfless. And when it turns into the opposite of that, you're no longer in the brotherhood per se, you're using it to your advantage, you're using it against them. And that's a danger, is when people use that term or that idea against someone.
Bam. I love it. Isaac, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it can be weaponized. At the same time, it's understanding still like what the definition of brotherhood is, and looking at, let's use the mafia as an example, right? And a lot of people would say the mafia was a brotherhood, and they would call each other up at 3 a.m. and be like, bring a shovel and some lye, we're taking care of business. And they would do it. But at the same time, if you look at any interviews with mafiosos and made men, everyone was still cutting their own angle to be the top guy. Even though there was a brotherhood, they were still willing to, kill for, but also kill the guy on their left and right in order to make a deal that was sweeter for themselves. And that is not a brotherhood. That is the word brotherhood thrown around something to make it seem more acceptable to our human nature, but it's not brotherhood. And so, brotherhood is having someone who's willing to go through adversity with you and to keep going through adversity with you in order to have a level of support and understanding for each other when something arises. It's not a, hey, I need you to help me do something illegal that could hurt your family and hurt mine. No, like that's not brotherhood. Brotherhood is, hey, I want to help support you and your family because we've been through something together and we continue to go through something together. Should be the opposite. Once it's the opposite, it's not brotherhood anymore. It's a very distorted and mutated version of the word.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. And it's funny that you bring up the mafia, because at times, if you got a call to like bring a shovel and some lime and dig this hole, it's going to be for you. It's not going to be for somebody else. So it's something to keep your eyes on. But I'm really glad that we are touching on all this stuff. And I hear the word brotherhood a lot. Yeah. What do you got?
Just because the word mafia was thrown around, it's in line with a few words that I'd scribbled down before the start of the show to kind of chew on the idea of, well, what is brotherhood? And so I'm just going to throw out some words, but one of them is key because it relates directly back to your question, Chance, which is what is some of the negative aspects of brotherhood? So just bear with me for a sec. The words that I scribbled down were this: loyalty, secrecy, support, exclusion, power, tradition, shared purpose. Now, those are a few words, but the one word that I do want to kind of lock into is exclusion. Because one of the great things about the sort of power structures of brotherhoods is controlling access to through the lens of exclusiveness. So the more secretive a brotherhood is, the more exclusive a brotherhood is, the more typically the desire to be in it, even though you don't understand it. And so these various brotherhoods that exist around the world, and I'm not talking about military, I'm not talking about either esoteric brotherhoods, secret societies that, goat's blood and all that good stuff. What I'm talking about is communities that are exclusive to get into. And I don't mean just like you've got to earn your way in. You've got to be invited in. You just can't like do the grind for 8, 10, 12 years and you just grind your way into the membership. I'm talking about something that is exclusive, like you just freaking grind. And then eventually something shows up in the mail and says, we're interested. So these kind of exclusivity things create a form of brotherhood that somehow I feel strengthens the brotherhood because it is exclusive. But there is an aspect to exclusive brotherhood where it can be negative because of its exclusivity. It blindly turns an eye to people who would be an attribute to the brotherhood. In other words, the brotherhood starts drinking its own Kool-Aid and doesn't want anyone in its club unless they drink the same color Kool-Aid. What's your thoughts?
Yes, the incestuous nature of those brotherhoods is it can be, what's the word? It can create a negative cascade through everything, which is, I'm loving this. Clay, what do you think?
Yes, I feel like and a lot of those brotherhoods that are exclusive in the way that it's power, pleasure, profit, honor, that replaces the real exclusive nature of the brotherhood, which to me is a quality that you just know that isn't given to you by someone else. I mean, the truth to me is that when someone is true to themselves or true to a brotherhood, it's not something that someone else gives you per se. It's I recognize that in that person, and they recognize it in themselves, and nothing has to be said or given. And to me, that's the exclusive brotherhood. It's self-respect, it's self-assurance, it's confidence in who you are. That's the exclusive brotherhood that I would want to be a part of, because it doesn't need to be said, and their qualities that you just live, like Sean was saying, it's just lived. There is no one that has because part of the exclusive brotherhoods that Sean's talking about, it requires someone to have their own idea of who should be in and who shouldn't be in it. But a brotherhood that is intrinsic, that is recognized without words, that's a different kind of exclusivity. That's a different kind of brotherhood. That's not one that you have to be asked to be a part of. That's one that you can see in a man when you meet them. So I think it's an interesting point. It's a different way of thinking about it. And of course, Sean's always throwing those good thought experiments out there.
He's got the mic drops on a pretty regular basis.
Yeah.
Isaac, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think that there's a point in time where people can think they're in a brotherhood and they're actually in a cult. And oftentimes it's that line that crosses of being willing to harm oneself or others for the sake of personal gain or the personal gain of the leader. And I think that we can throw a facade on brotherhood, but really be in a cult. And so when looking at, the potential dangers of brotherhood and looking at those words that Sean was, talking about, sometimes we have to do a check and make sure that our brotherhood isn't something nefarious or something that was formed with nefarious means. And I guess to break this down, it's looking at something that's really exclusive, that's invite only, and it's what's going on behind closed doors that cause it to be that specifically meticulous to get in. And there's a level of secrecy there that makes you want to do it. But that want turns into desire. That desire turns into being zealous towards it. That becomes envy. That becomes, I'm going to scratch, claw, and do anything absolutely necessary that they require of me to get into that. Well, what is it that they're requiring from you? What is it that you have to do to get into something so exclusive, to get that invite? And if you find yourself wanting to be in so bad that you're willing to do things that you otherwise wouldn't have done, it's probably not a brotherhood, probably a cult. And so you have to have that, mental check there of what is it that you're actually getting into.
I could not agree more with that one. It's such a good point. The concept of payment, at least what I was thinking was that a brotherhood really should give to the people in it. It doesn't matter how exclusive it is, but it should be giving something to each person. And it kind of goes back to the point I was making earlier in terms of like certain values are going to start costing other values. And are you willing to pay that price to? And then I think that at that point is where you start getting into a cult, right? Is loyalty worth your ethics? Is dedication to the cause worth your family? Then that's where you got to start. Do I really? Is that club? Is this brotherhood really worth these things? That's a tough call. Now,
well, I do. This is a little actionable point for anyone who's listening, and it's because Isaac said it a handful of times in that little piece there, and it was, what do they want? What do they want you to do? What do they want you to become? But the question that you should be asking yourself as an actionable item is, what do I want? Not what do they want? What do I want? Now, you can be part of a team. You can be a team player. You can be the freaking team captain. But you still always got to ask yourself, what do I want? This is as Isaac has said, and as I've said many times, This is a solo journey. You're lined up with other people, just like we're all lined up together right now. But it is still a solo journey. When this call ends, we're all on our solo journeys. We'll be back in our combined journeys at another time. But this is all a solo journey. When you're with people, never lose sight of what do I want? And that isn't the same as what's in it for me. That's a different thing. What do I want? Why do I want this? Never give up your personal agency by framing anything by what do they want? Too much. Don't be saying that too much. Life is a balance. What's in it for you and what's in it for quote unquote them? And neither of those things are bad. They're not negatives. They can be very positively engaging and positively directional shaping. But you have to ask, not just what do they want, what do I want?
Yeah, you got to ask them both at the same time, not at separate times along the way. Now, and I hate to do this, but we got to shut her down for the afternoon. We could sit here and probably talk for another 3 or 4 hours on this, and without a doubt, I can't thank you guys enough because this has been awesome. So Isaac, Clay, Sean, thank you guys. This is really awesome conversation, and it's going to make people question where they fit in what brotherhoods. I know it. We're going to get lots of thoughts on this one, so I can't thank you guys enough. Let's get some final thoughts on anything brotherhood, everything brotherhood. Isaac, you're on the bottom. Let's hit you first. What do you got?
Last thoughts is that ultimately your brotherhood should just be a place or a group, and it doesn't even have to be a big group, but it should be a group that motivates and inspires you to do more, and that you're able to collectively be a part of inspiring and motivating the others to do more. And if you all do that together, then you're going to see a collective rise in your little group, no matter how small or big it is. And that is the foundations of a good brotherhood. So if you're searching for that, I mean, if you're watching this, chances are you're in one, whether you realize it or not. And all it takes is you reaching out and talking or messaging to any of us. I can't speak for everyone else, but I do know most of the speakers that have been on here are good people that if you just message us and say, hey, I saw you on the collective, we will message back. We will talk. Like I'll talk to any of you. So yeah, just be a part of it. Communicate, step up.
I love it. Clay, how about yourself? Final thoughts?
Yeah, I just always appreciate you guys letting me come on this Sunday. You know, brotherhood in a lot of ways could be, you know, if any person could look back on what they view as the best time of their life or the best version of themselves that they viewed in their lives, or of someone that they respect, all of those values and characteristics could be the brotherhood. And you should try to honor and strive to live those values and those ethics and those morals that you as an individual and that I myself deem as important, because that could be what the brotherhood is. And if you lose sight of that, you could be a little bit lost and find your way outside of the brotherhood. But it's important to know that it's always going to be there, because there are always going to be leaders. There are always going to be people like Sean, Isaac, and Chance who are going to hold some portion of what is the ideal brotherhood in their lives. So if you are the kind of person that feels like you've lost your way a little bit on what the brotherhood is, if you've identified a portion of it, it's always there to find again if you, as Sean would say, get in the game.
Bam, look at that. Using your own quotes against you, Sean. Any final thoughts?
It's a shame as well, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Get in the freaking game. I'll wrap it up by saying this, that chances are, if if you're not a teenager, you've already been in a brotherhood. Some form of brotherhood, even if it was a tiny one, ill-defined, ill-run, even if it was mediocre. If you're not a teenager anymore, you've been in a brotherhood. You maybe don't think of it that way, but you have been in some capacity. And if you think back, it was probably a real good time of your life. You're on that soccer team, you're on that volleyball team, you're on that whatever team. The brotherhood requires a team, really. And so I think that every human I know has always, at some point in their life, been on some kind of a team. If you haven't been on a team for a long time, I mean, like physically active with it, and by that I mean engaged with it. If you haven't been on a team for a long time, that's a great way to reintroduce yourself to a physical brotherhood. Go join a book reading club, go join the chess club, go join other humans in their pursuit of a group-minded progress. The collective is just a bunch of people spread all over the world that kind of like talking about things in a way that just kind of makes sense to us. But there'll be people that it doesn't make any sense to. They'll find their team. You've got to find your team. And so you've done it once, you can do it again. You don't have to consider what you want to do next as, and I have to be number one in it. You've just got to start in the last position of it and work your way through the crowd until you're heading towards number one, whatever that means to you. Just get in something and pursue like a freak. And along the way, you'll find a brotherhood.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I was going to say, similar to what Clay was saying earlier, was seek your values. If you really seek those values, you'll find the brotherhood. It'll be waiting for you, and it'll be sitting there at the door going, okay, do you want to live these values or do you not want to live these values? Similar to how Sean used to do it to me and to other people who've done it to me in the past, and the military did it for me back in the day. There's got to be a standard. And if there's no standard, then there's really no brotherhood. So I can't thank you guys enough. It's just been absolutely fantastic. So as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, see you next week. Chimo.
Chimo.
Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see y'all next time.